never wore corsets or a girdle. I was very thin, but even so, I don't think I ever would wear a corset or girdle. I never have. When I got married, my mother-in-law was horrified that I didn't wear corsets, so she made an appointment with the Spirala corset lady to come to our house to measure me. I consented to the fitting and paying for the corset, but never intended to wear it. The woman made a mistake and measured me wrong. She had accidentally had a piece about 4 inches accidentally cut off her tape, so when the corset was delivered, I put it on and it just fell off, even if I laced it as tight as it would go. I thought it was hilarious, but my mother-in-law was upset because I had to pay for it anyhow. It all turned out all right, though, because it fit my mother-in-law perfectly. So I was off the hook, literally and actually. It was thought that if you didn't wear corsets, your abdomen would enlarge and become flabby. The opposite is true. There wasn't the emphasis on exercise there is now, but women had more work to do. However, women were advised to do exercise, preferably in front of an open window. They didn't amount to much more than bending and stretching. We were given exercise to do after our children were born, and when my last 2 were born, there was a physical therapist who put us through our paces a day or 2 before we went home. We lived in our large 11-room house until all the children except our 2 daughters had moved out. Both of them were attending university. We got a 2-bedroom suite in an apartment on Dallas Road, and my husband bought a sailboat. We enjoyed the boat very much. And when my husband retired, both daughters were away from home, and we moved aboard the boat. We had telephone, television, and enjoyed living aboard for over 6 years. We traveled the BC coast quite extensively. However, my husband had to have heart surgery, and we came ashore and lived in Sydney. Our older daughter was transferred to Richmond with the Royal Bank, and she asked us to come and live with her. She had bought a new house. She's not married. There was a fence to build and a garden to prepare from start. We have a truck and camper and enjoy the freedom of leaving when we please to travel without the expense of the ferry. We can also enjoy the city benefits of shows and entertainment. We have family in Richmond, Nanaimo, Port Alberni, and Victoria, all available in a matter of 2.5 to 3 hours. Our daughter enjoys having us with her so far, but if anything changes, we are free as the wind and can move where we please. We enjoy a full life and do not feel our age. One doesn't realize they're getting old until you look in a mirror. When I do, I realize I'm not really wrinkled. My skin is just too big for me. I have been active in the peace movement and anti-nuclear movement for many years. I'm a charter member of Voice of Women and the Abortion Reform Committee. I belonged to Voice of Women during the U.S. McCarthy era, and we were dubbed communists. There were peace activists in Port Angeles who attended our meetings surreptitiously because it was almost illegal in the U.S. I was publicity convener for Voice of Women and worked hard to publicize the horrors of war and promote peace through education and negotiations. Many prominent people belonged to the peace movement at that time. We were dubbed unpatriotic, but we're hoping people would listen to the prominent speakers who were our guests and realize there was a better way to settle our differences besides killing each other. During the 60s, the thinking changed, and there were there were less militant people who didn't believe it was glorious and meritorious, and the death of young, beloved people was not necessary. There has to be a better way to resolve differences and make the world a better place for all of us. We will all have to get out and help push the world to keep it going around. It has come to one world or no world. Nuclear weapons give nations a feeling of power strong enough to conquer the world for themselves and make everyone else accept their way of thinking. There are enough natural resources in the world to keep everyone fed, clothed, and housed and employed. I feel I owe it to the world to do what I can to make it a better place for all people. When I see and hear all the prejudice afforded to our new immigrants and people of different faiths and color than us, I despair ever having a peaceful world. I think my ideas are too simplistic to deal with the Husseins and the war barons. I can't even read my right hand. The Husseins and people are fighting for monetary gain. Can it be changed? Will we survive? That's it. Now, where do I go?
That's it?
Well, up till now. Maybe we'll think of something else I should write about. Terrible that I'm reading this.
Yeah.
I mean, listening to it will be bad enough.
Mm-hmm. Why did your parents come to Vancouver? How did they pick Vancouver?
Oh, Auntie Mary and Uncle Matt, and Uncle John and Auntie Mary lived. Uncle John and Auntie Mary and Uncle Murdoch lived here. Mm-hmm. Mama's two brothers and her sisters. So write that down. Mama's two. Oh well. I'll just say it then. The reason we chose to come to Vancouver to live was because my mother's two brothers and sister were settled here. I think I said somewhere in here that they got us a house when we first arrived. That was why we came.
I don't remember saying that.
Oh, okay.
You might have. It was a long time ago.
Probably not. We arrived in Vancouver, where my mother's brother and sisters and family lived. They had found us a house, so we settled in temporarily.
Okay, I missed that then.
Okay.
How were you treated by Canadian children?
When we moved into our first house, it was on 57th Avenue. In fact, my sister was just talking about it yesterday. The people were very kind to my mother. The parents were very kind and helpful. But most people resented us. I realize now it was a matter of employment. If you were from North Uist or if you had lived in Glasgow, the BC Electric had asked for men, advertised in Glasgow for men to come and drive their streetcars. See, Glasgow had had streetcars for many, many years, and they were new to Vancouver. Well, when you were emigrating, you just contacted one of your relatives, and you could actually get off the train and walk into your job the same day. And it was, what do you call it? What's the word I'm looking for? You know, when you hire someone.
Nepotism.
It was nepotism, pure nepotism. On the other hand, people from the other islands had relatives who would come out and settled on the prairies and then moved to Victoria, and were in the higher paying jobs as managers and workmen all through the grain elevators. And these people ended up working in the grain elevators, generation after generation. Pure nepotism again. I see now why people would resent the Scottish people, because they got work, they were good workers, and they were clannish too. They had their own societies. There was the Caledonian Society, the Gaelic Society, the Sons of Scotland. Other nationalities had the same thing, the Sons of England and all their different lodges. But Scottish people had their own churches, and they just felt that, of course it was rumoured that Scottish people were stingy, which was one of the meanest things that they could say, and that bothered us a lot. So people laughed at us. There were many Scottish jokes. In fact, up till 2 or 3 years ago, when the Hungarian people were here, this was the new wave of immigrants. There was a place that made pierogies. I think it was called Hunky Bill's. It had been there for years, and Ukrainians and Polish people, all the European were just labeled hunkies. But they got so used to it, it didn't bother them. But the new immigrants were very upset by this, and it was brought to the fore, and Hunky Bill's had to change its name. Well, the same thing was happening to the Scottish people. The Safeway had a special brand. They called it Scotch brand. People didn't realize that it was, what do you call it? Prejudiced. Wait, I'm looking for something sort of nationalistic. Oh, it's so common. Racist! It was racist. There were many things like that. And if you say something, well, let's go here, let's go to this show, it's a little bit cheaper, and people say, oh, you're just being Scotch. And we lived next door. I said when we came to 57th Avenue is where we lived. And the people were very nice. In fact, my sister is still very friendly with the sons. But the children learned there was something about us that they weren't supposed to like. They didn't know what they were doing or why they were doing it. Of course, they would shout at me in English. I didn't understand what they were saying. But they wanted to hit me. So they gestured for me to come over to the fence, which I did. They punched me. Then I learned not to go so near to the fence. So one day he came out with a lath. Laths were long strips of rough lumber about 1 inch by a 1/4 inch. They were used for siding on walls. The laths were attached and then plaster put on top of them. So this boy put some rocks and some mud and some stone sticks on the end of this lath, and of course I stood there stupidly, and he stood and he just swung it, and of course it hit me right in the eye, and my eye has been permanently damaged because of that. I heard my sister came home from school, and the children were fighting, something that was new to us. We guess there was maybe too much difference in our ages. We didn't fist, we probably argued, but we certainly never hit each other and fought. But this was quite common apparently in the schools and horrified us. Anyhow, my sister came home and she told my mother that this girl was fighting with another girl, and she reached over and pulled the girl's hair right out of her head by the roots. I imagined that was a horrible thing, because the girl would have a big hole in her head. I thought our scalps were like a pineapple, about an inch thick, and the hair was attached. And of course, when she pulled it out by the roots, I figured the whole cranium would come out. And when I saw the girl, she didn't have a hole in her head. There were many things that, when you couldn't speak English, you didn't understand what they said. But later on, you would catch on. But when I see immigrants now who don't speak English, I really feel for them. Although there are more of them now, they're more accepted, I think. But I realize how hard it is for them to learn to speak English. And I think that our tongues, muscles or something, must develop in different ways according to the language we speak, because it must be difficult for them to get around some of the sounds. It's also very difficult for someone who has never spoken Gaelic to pronounce a lot of the Gaelic words. There isn't a word like them in English or anything to explain the words or the sounds. Like Akaf. Anyone that had just spoken English would say Agav, but it's not G, it's not CH, it's Akaf. And it's not F in the end, that means possess, Akaf. Of course, the worst prejudice I had to put up with was at the school. That really, really hurt. Did I talk about the wool bathing suits?
Yeah. How did your brothers and sisters feel about immigrating to Canada?
They looked forward to it. They loved it. They wanted to they were older, and it was quite exciting. I think my older brother must have been at least 12, and my sister would be 10, and the other one sister would be 7, and then I was about 4, and they loved it. They enjoyed the boat trip. I remember them running around and having a wonderful time. I was very, very seasick and frightened and heartbroken about leaving my calf and my home. It was just, I felt torn. I was very close to my grandmother, and she had just died. And even as a child, I used to I thought in Gaelic for a long time. And every once in a while I would see a picture that reminded me of Uist. Actually, one of them was, people used to put Reckitt's blue in the last rinse of their wash. It was like a blue cylindrical cake about an inch high and an inch across, blue and white straps and stripes on it, tied in a little bag, and it was soaked in water, and your sheets were added or whatever you wanted to come out white. And they used to advertise on large billboards, and there was a picture of a woman and a young girl, and of course this house was on the seashore, and the wind was blowing and the sheets were blowing in the wind, and it was a Reckitt's blue ad, and it read, "Out of the blue comes the whitest wash." And when I looked at it, I don't know how to explain it except that I felt an emotional pain. I was just so homesick to go back to Uist. I finally did go back to Uist for a visit. The first time was in 1975. I just visited briefly then, but that was in 1975. My daughters and I had drove up from London, and as we went onto the island, I had no idea where I was going. I didn't think anyone at all would know me or my family, but I noticed a sign that said Bay Head, so we followed the road, and as we drove down Bay Head Road, we came to the road that went down to where we lived, I remembered the church, and then as I went further on, there was a little thatched cottage, and in the lake, and there was another small tuft of a little island, and there was a swan nesting, and I looked at the house, and I knew that was the house I was born in. I knew it was my grandfather's house. So we went to park the car, and this woman came out and said, "No, no, you can't park here." To her, we were just tourists from London, and the roads are very narrow. It's almost impossible for two cars to pass. They're mostly one-way roads. So I looked at her and I said, "Oh, we didn't want to park here. We were just looking for a place to either park or, where's their hotel or is there a place to stay?" So in the meantime, the gentleman that owned the house came out, and I looked at him and I said, "I know you." I said, "You look so familiar." I said, "You look so much like Maisie Ling, who's a very good friend of ours." Well, he said, "And who are you?" I said, "I'm Peggy MacDonald," and of course I spoke to him in Gaelic, and he looked at me. "Come in, come in, come in." He told us we decided we'd like to stay on the sandy beach that night. Beautiful miles of white sand. So he showed us the best place to park. His name was John MacDonald, and he was the council member for the Hebrides, and he became a very, very good friend. And of course, he helped me find all my relatives. And we only stayed a short time in US because we were going to go back to London and then through Europe. So we left, and we had to catch our train to London, so we left very soon. But I came back the next year, and I was met by so many people and made so welcome. I was wined and dined from 10 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the next morning. I hardly got any sleep. Everyone came to visit me. I visited with everyone. It was wonderful. And the night I left, they took the boat. I hadn't rented a car. I took the boat over to Skye. And the hotel was just full of people saying goodbye, and they all sang, "Will you no come back again?" So I went back again several times. The last time was 2 years ago. I still hope to go back again sometime. Because I get a lot of letters, and of course now we can telephone. I dial in my kitchen and talk to the people on the island of Uist as though it was just anywhere in Canada. And the island has really developed and has really progressed. The Highlands and Highlands Development Board chose the island of North Uist and Benbecula as the place to build a very modern, advanced school. It's a large building. It has hostels for the children of the outer islands to come to. It has a gymnasium, it has the theatre, it has a swimming pool, and all subjects are taught right up to grade 12. The curriculum is extremely good. Teachers from all over the world, actually. And it's a very modern school, and the children are encouraged to do well. The children that have lived on the island love the island, but they also know there's another world out there that they want to see. So if you do well in school, you're sent on to high school, and there is no charge. You just everything is provided except your school uniform. I believe you have to provide that. And then if you do well, off to university at no cost. And you stay in a dorm. Usually it's 3 rooms with a central kitchen. And you can go through university. My cousin's children have gone to university and excelled. In fact, her oldest daughter always got the highest marks in US. She got the highest marks in Glasgow. She did extremely well at university and became a cancer research person in Bristol. So they've built new roads. There are lots of stores, lots of shops. You can hire cars, trucks, and there are a lot of bus tours now. The island, on the west shore, there's miles of sand you can walk out on. You can drive out on it. You have to be very careful because the big waves come in with the tide, and if you get caught by one of the waves, you get sucked right under. It's the same as Long Beach. But it's a beautiful, beautiful spot. And my grandmother's house is still standing there. The house that I was born in, and the house my father built. And it was partly finished when they decided to move to Canada. It has become a lodge. It's a beautiful modern home. Everyone has 2 cars in their garage. They're much better off than we are. They're certainly not poor people. When we left, things were very depressed, and there didn't seem to be much of a future for the islands, and it really was pretty tough during the Depression. Although they could always live off the island, they had everything there and didn't need anything. And the amazing thing is, they said you wouldn't have known on the islands that there was a war going on. The only thing that they ever saw of the war was a barge that washed ashore, and on it were 2 dead Canadian boys who were buried in Uist, and then when they were identified, they were reburied wherever, some military cemetery somewhere, I imagine. But they needed for nothing. They had everything there. The people love to sing, and they're very good dancers. But singing is a way of relaxing, and it relieves stress. It's just a way of making everyone happy. And at one time, while traveling on the bus from Portree to Glasgow to get out to Prestwick, as soon as I got on the bus, one young fellow, I guess he's about 19 or so, turned around to everybody, well, and of course he said in Gaelic, well, what will we sing first? And they all burst into song. It was really something to hear. Of course, they called me the Canadian, and they would apologize for speaking Gaelic and talk English. And then it became my turn to say what we would like to sing. So when I turned around and sang them a song in Gaelic, they were all so happy. They were very pleased. If you could speak Gaelic, it got you ticket to hospitality in any house on the islands. Maybe that's reverse prejudice. Maybe. Anyhow, it's a wonderful place to go to. But I wouldn't. Well, there was a time I said I would never want my children to be raised there. It wouldn't be too bad now. In fact, if I had a small child, I think I might even send him to school in Uist. It is one of the best. Princess Margaret had all her birthdays in Uist. Up till, well, I don't know, maybe a few years ago. One of the lords owned quite a big house in South Uist, and that's where they came to celebrate Princess Margaret's birthday. Lord Granville is the present administrator of the island. At one time, the people couldn't own the land, and they were tenants of whoever was granted the Lord of Balranald title. Because people were put off the islands during the big clearances. My father's aunt was one of the people that was forcibly made to leave the island. They were put on ships, very old, decapitated, not decapitated, that would be headed, decrepit ships. And they allowed 1 tablespoon of oatmeal and a teaspoonful of molasses per person per day. Of course, many of them died on the way. My father's aunt settled somewhere in Cape Breton, but we could never find her. My father used to try to find her, but he never knew what happened to her. Now, during, at the time when Lord Hamilton, I believe it was in charge of the island, he liked his drink. And his mother actually was the person in charge, and he was up there sort of looking after things for her. Anyhow, he sold some of the crofts outright to the people for the money. So a lot of people own their own crofts now. And when the present Lord Granville came up to the island, my cousin raises Highland cattle, and she ships them all over the world. Lord Granville came along with a shooting party, and he was on her property and shooting his guns off and scaring the cows and the calves. So she went over to him and she said, "I wonder if you would mind not hunting right here because you're frightening my cattle." He said to her, "What do you mean? That's not your land. I own this whole island." And she said, "No, you do not. You own a very small portion of this island." So he said, he got very cross with her, and he says, "I'm going to see that you're removed from your croft, and I'll have my lawyers out here right away." They didn't do. His lawyers came out in a helicopter and told him, "You're wrong, Lord Granville. You only own a little bit of the island. These people own the land now, so you cannot trespass on their property." When my father was a young man, he was walking back to his croft, and he took a shortcut through, it was Lord Balranald at the time, through Lord Balranald's property. Lord Balranald was out horseback riding. Now, the shortcut he took through the property was just nothing. It was just a tiny little piece of his land he crossed over. So he came up and he hit my father across the face with his riding crop. So during just before the 1914 war, Lord Balranald, who possessed all the best land on the island, and while the other people just had been put onto practically rocks, it was compulsory that they work for him, whether he wanted to pay them or not. If you didn't, he would go have his men bring you and make you work. At that time, my grandfather was a young man and working on a road for Lord Balranald. And when he fed the boys their lunch, the servants came out with potatoes and cold herring. And he just threw it on the ground. They were supposed to scramble like animals for it. Of course, my grandfather refused. He went home and told my great-grandfather, who was very incensed about this. So he went, told him, his son, he said, you don't have to go there anymore. So Lord Balranald came around and he said, yes, he does. We'll take him by force if you don't send him. And he said, well, you won't take him. I won't let you. You're not going to treat my son that way. My son is not an animal. So Balranald consented to giving them plates to eat off. But things, then during when it was up to Lord Balranald to recruit as many men as he could for the war effort. Well, the men just told him, you put the men off their own land and filled it with sheep. Let your sheep go and fight the wars for you. Anyhow, he realized that they just wouldn't do what he ordered them to do. So he said, well, if you boys will go to war, I promise you that I'll divide up what they call the Macher, the best land on this nice loam land, very fertile land, and each of you will get a piece when you come back. Fine. They had him sign it. He signed an agreement this would be. So off they went to war. And they did come back. And they went to get their land, and Lord Balranald just laughed at them. So this one chap, his name was Alan Macaulay, big, strong, 6'4" fellow. He said, that's fine. We'll just possess it. We'll move on to it. So they did. They just went onto the land and wouldn't let Lord Balranald near it. So Lord Balranald sent his son down on his horse, and his son was wearing the kilt. He was an English fellow, so they pulled him into the water and pulled his kilt off and threw it out to sea. So Balranald had them all arrested, and they were all put to jail in Inverness. And this story has been published, I guess, all over the world. It was on BBC and CBC. This fellow, John Macaulay, all the jail outfits were the same size, and his only came to just above his knees and to his elbows. He was quite a comical-looking figure. So they were left in jail, no designated time for their lives as far as they could figure, in Inverness, and they got very poor meals and very poor accommodation. But somehow, one of the English MPs heard about this. He brought it up in the House of Commons. And they found the papers that Lord Balranald had given to the men saying, when you come back from the war, you will own these pieces of land. So they made it stick. And the men got their land. And they now have very nice homes on this lovely land, nice farms. And Balranald was put in his place. I don't know. I think that probably the successors are appointed by the Queen, because Queen Elizabeth often comes up to Uist to fish. Princess Margaret really likes Uist. And as a matter of fact, my two daughters and I were in my cousin's tweed shop. She was a weaver. She raised her own sheep and spun and wore beautiful woolens. And we were in her shop, and these other people came in, and without saying anything to us, we felt we were just pushed into the background, a little bit miffed, I guess. And she said, why don't you girls go and just sit in the kitchen? I'll be with you soon. So, of course, we went and sat in her kitchen, and she stayed in the shop with these people. And when they were gone, she said, you'll have to pardon me for treating you like that. She said these girls had come up to Uist in a helicopter, which is the way they traveled to and from the islands. And the one girl I was talking to was the sister of Prince Charles' girlfriend, which was Lady Di's sister. they were with, there was an older woman with them who seemed to be sort of, well, I guess we call them almost an attendant. They'd come up to buy tweeds and woolens, I guess just come up to see the island. It was Princess Di's sister. Queen Elizabeth also visited, and she visited my cousin and was in her house, and my cousin had a little plaque made that she has on the back of the chair that says, Queen Elizabeth sat here. Don't know if that's interesting or not. You can put what you think of it in, if you want. Not that that's not important. It's more Canadian history that they're interested in.
Yeah. You want to go back to the Depression in Vancouver?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, what was I going to ask you?
Did you talk about the post office boys?
No, you didn't. I was going to ask you to talk
Oh, I
about
thought
that.
I had read that. Where did I miss that? Yeah, if I read this part,